Some people cross oceans chasing dreams. Zara Coleman crossed one, running from a nightmare she couldn't afford to lose to. She didn't come to Seoul looking for love. She didn't come looking for a soft life or a fresh start or any of the pretty things people imagine when they picture a young woman boarding a plane to the other side of the world. She came because her mother was dying by inches in a hospital bed in Atlanta. And somewhere across the Pacific Ocean, there was supposed to be a job that paid enough to keep her alive. That was the whole reason. That was everything. Please stay with me as I unveil to you what is about to happen. Don't forget to subscribe. She stepped off the plane at Incheon International Airport carrying one suitcase, a folded piece of paper with an address written on it, and the kind of quiet courage that doesn't announce itself to anybody. The kind that just keeps walking when walking is the only thing left to do. The cold hit her first. A different cold than Atlanta ever knew. Was sharper, cleaner, the kind that gets into your chest and reminds you how far from home you really are. She pulled her coat tighter and followed the signs she couldn't fully read, trusting the few words of Korean she'd taught herself in the weeks before she left. She had studied that language at 2 in the morning, in the glow of a hospital parking lot, sitting in a borrowed car because she couldn't bear to go home to an empty apartment while her mother lay in a ward across the street. She had whispered Korean phrases to herself between sobs, learned to count, learned to say please and thank you and I'm sorry, learned just enough to survive in a country that owed her nothing. Kang. She didn't know yet that those late-night lessons would one day save her life in ways she couldn't imagine. The Kwon estate sat in the wealthiest district of Seoul, behind gates that opened without a human hand ever touching them. Zara stood outside it for a long moment, looking up at a house so large, it seemed to belong to a different category of building altogether. Gardens stretched out on either side, perfectly kept, perfectly silent on. The kind of gardens that looked like nobody was ever actually allowed to enjoy them. In Atlanta, her whole apartment could have fit inside the entryway. Cha. A woman met her at the door. Madame Kwon, the mother of the household, and as Zara would soon learn, the true power behind every wall of that estate. She received Zara the way wealthy people receive things they haven't yet decided whether to keep. Not cruel, just distant, measuring. Her eyes moved over Zara the way you'd inspect a piece of furniture you weren't sure would match the room. "You're Korean," Madame Kwon said. "Conversational, ma'am," Zara answered. Madame Kwon made a small sound that might have been approval and might have been doubt. Then she turned to her assistant and said, in Korean, low and dismissive, "We'll see how long this one lasts." What Madame Kwon didn't notice, because women like her rarely notice the people they've already decided not to see, was that Zara understood every single word. Zara said nothing. She had learned a long time ago, growing up poor in a world that judged her before she opened her mouth, that the most powerful thing you can sometimes do is let people believe you don't understand them. Let them talk. Let them reveal themselves. People show you exactly who they are when they think you can't follow what they're saying. So she lowered her eyes, nodded politely, and let Madame Kwon believe whatever she wanted to believe. The rules came quickly. Breakfast prepared by 7 each morning. The house kept spotless at all times. Madame Kwon's son took his coffee early and strong, and he was not to be disturbed unnecessarily. Zara listened, memorized, said yes ma'am, in that careful Korean that was better than anyone expected, though no one said so. She was shown to a small room at the back of the house. A bed, a window, a single shelf. It wasn't much. But it was warm, and it was hers, and right now, that was enough. She sat on the edge of the bed and breathed. She had made it. She was here. The first part of the plan was done. Now she just had to survive long enough to save her mother. That first night, she called home. The connection took a moment to find its way across all those thousands of miles, and then her mother's voice came through, thin but warm. The warmth was the part that mattered. Her mother's voice had always been like candlelight when the wax is low, smaller than it used to be, but still glowing, still there. "Baby," her mother said, "you made it." "I made it, Mama." "How is it? Tell me everything." Zara looked around the small room, looked out the window at the cold, beautiful, lonely city. "It's beautiful," she said. "Cold, but beautiful." "And the people? Are they good to you?" There was a pause, the kind of pause that says everything without saying anything at all. "I'm going to be fine, Mama," Zara said. "I'm going to make everything fine." "Ha. You always do, baby. You always do." They talked a little longer, about nothing, about everything, about the small, ordinary things that mean the most when there's an ocean between you. And when Zara finally hung up, she sat in the silence of that enormous house and let herself feel, just for a moment, how far she had come and how far she still had to go. Somewhere upstairs, a door opened, footsteps crossed a hallway, then silence again. She didn't know yet that the footsteps belonged to the man who would turn her whole world upside down. Kwon Junho had spent his entire adult life being exactly what everybody needed him to be. The Kwon name carried weight in Seoul: real estate, construction, old money wrapped up in new architecture and clean glass towers. And Junho was the face of the next generation. Educated in London, polished in every room he entered, fluent in the language of expectation that his family spoke better than any mother tongue. What nobody ever thought to ask was whether any of it made him happy. He had a fiancée. Her name was Hyuna, and she was everything a family like his would carefully select. Beautiful, well-connected, raised in the same rarefied air. She had been part of his life so long that her presence had become like the furniture of his existence. Familiar, expected, never really examined. She arrived at the estate like an event arrives, laughing at exactly the right volume, saying exactly the right things, touching his arm at exactly the moments that looked good to whoever was watching. The truth was, Junho was tired in a way that sleep had never been able to fix. The kind of tired that lives behind the eyes and underneath the smile. And no one around him seemed to notice. Or perhaps they noticed and chose not to ask, because the answer might have been inconvenient to a great many people's plans. He moved through his days like a man wearing a suit that fit perfectly but that he couldn't quite breathe in. And then, one ordinary morning, everything began to change over a spilled cup of coffee. He came down the stairs faster than he should have, his mind already somewhere else, and rounded a corner straight into a young woman carrying a breakfast tray. Coffee went everywhere, the cup clattered, and both of them reached down for the same cloth at exactly the same moment. He started to apologize. The automatic, smoothing over apology of a man used to making awkward moments disappear. And then she looked up at him and said something no one in that house had ever said to him. "Are you hurt?" "Heh." Not, "I'm sorry, sir." Not, "It was my fault." Not the nervous fluttering of someone afraid of losing their job over a spilled cup. Just, "Are you hurt?" A real question, a human question, as if his well-being was the first thing worth checking. He stood there a second longer than made any sense. "I'm fine," he said. "Are you?" "I'm always fine," she answered, already wiping up the spill with quick, practiced hands. And something about the way she said it, like it was true, and also a little bit of a private joke at her own expense, made him feel, for one strange moment, like he was talking to an actual person, instead of playing his part in the endless performance his life had become. He went back upstairs, sat with his coffee, stared at nothing for a long while. He didn't understand then why that small exchange stayed with him all day, why he kept hearing it. "Are you hurt?" As if somebody, somewhere had finally thought to ask. The weeks went by, and the estate revealed its rhythms, and Zara learned every one of them. She learned which floorboards creaked and which stayed silent. She learned that Madame Kwan took her tea exactly 1 degree hotter than most people could stand. She learned the precise hour the morning light came through the eastern windows, and the exact moment it left. She learned that this enormous house, full of people and possessions and the weight of a great family name, was somehow one of the loneliest places she had ever set foot in. And she learned that Jun-ho was not what she had expected him to be. He didn't speak to her the way wealthy men usually spoke to the people who cleaned their homes, like they were part of the architecture, like furniture that occasionally moved on its own. He spoke to her like she was a person. He asked her questions and then, strangest of all, he actually waited for the answers. He said thank you like he meant it, every time, never once forgetting. One afternoon, she was sitting in a quiet corner of the garden during her short break, a medical textbook open across her lap. She had never stopped studying, not once. Even after everything that had happened, even with her hands raw from cleaning and her body aching from the long days, she opened that book whenever she could steal 10 minutes, because somewhere underneath the maid's uniform there was still a nurse, and that nurse refused to die. That's where Jun-ho found her. "You're reading," he said. She looked up. "Did you think I couldn't?" He smiled, not the polite, automatic smile he gave the rest of the world, an actual smile, surprised out of him. "What is it?" he asked, nodding at the book. "Nursing. I was in school back home. Didn't get to finish." "What happened?" And there it was again, the second question. People asked the first question to be polite. The second question meant they actually wanted to know. She studied him for a moment, deciding how much truth to spend. "Life happened," she said finally, "the kind that doesn't ask your permission first." He nodded slowly, and something crossed his face that she hadn't expected. Recognition. "I know something about that," he said. She tilted her head. "Do you? What does that look like, from inside a house like this?" He didn't answer right away. He looked out at the garden, at all those perfect, expensive plants growing in their perfect, expensive silence. And for a moment, he looked like a man trying to remember how to be honest after years of being polished instead. "Like wearing a suit that fits perfectly," he said at last, "but you can't breathe in it." Zara held his gaze for a long, quiet moment. Then she looked back down at her book. But something had shifted between them. Something quiet and irreversible, the way a key turns in a lock you didn't even know was there. After that, the conversations came more easily. in stolen moments around the edges of her duties. He found her in the kitchen late one night when neither of them could sleep, and she made him a cup of tea the way her grandmother used to make it, slow, with care, steeping it exactly the right amount of time, and adding just a touch of honey at the end. He told her it was the best thing he'd had in years, and he wasn't being polite. He drank it standing at the counter, and they talked until the sky outside began to turn gray, about nothing and everything, in the easy way that only happens between two people who have somehow stopped performing for each other. She caught him reading in the library one rainy afternoon, and they discovered they'd loved some of the same books in ocean and a culture and a whole world apart. The same stories had found them both. He told her about studying in London, about the gray skies and the loneliness of being a wealthy foreign student who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. She told him about her grandmother's house in Georgia, about summers spent on a porch shelling peas and listening to old women tell stories, about a childhood that had been poor in money and rich in everything that money can't touch. He learned that she sang to herself when she thought no one was listening, old gospel songs from her grandmother's church, songs about rivers and crossings and a peace that passes understanding. Her voice filled the cold marble hallways with something warm and human and alive, something that house had been missing for longer than anyone could remember. The first time he heard it, he stopped in the corridor and simply stood there, listening, afraid that if he moved, she would notice him and stop. He had grown up surrounded by every beautiful thing money could buy, and somehow none of it had ever sounded like that. And she learned things about him too, that underneath the polish and the perfect manners, there was a man who had never once been asked what he wanted, that every decision in his life, his education, his career, his fiancé, his future, had been made for him before he was old enough to have an opinion, that he had learned, the way she had learned in her own very different world, to keep the truest part of himself hidden away where it couldn't be touched or taken or used against him. They were so different, a wealthy Korean heir and a black American maid, separated by money and culture and language and the entire breadth of the planet. And yet, in the quiet hours when the great house slept, they found that the loneliest part of each of them spoke the very same language. And slowly, without either of them quite deciding to let it happen, two people from two completely different worlds began to find in each other the one thing neither of them had ever truly had, someone who saw them, truly saw them, not the maid, not the heir, not the help and not the fortune, just Zara, just Junho, two people finally seen. But in a house like that, nothing happens unseen. And there were others who were watching very, very closely. Hyuna noticed before anyone put a single word to it. She was clever, far more clever than most people gave her credit for, and that underestimation was a weapon she had used many times. She had spent years becoming precisely what the Kwan family wanted in a daughter-in-law, and that kind of transformation requires a particular intelligence. The ability to read a room before anyone speaks, to feel the temperature of a relationship from across a dinner table, to sense the smallest shift in another person's heart before they've even noticed it themselves. And she could feel that something had changed in Junho. He was present now, in a way he had never been in all the years she'd known him. He hummed sometimes in the mornings. He pushed back against his mother's plans with a quiet new confidence. He smiled at things, small things, ordinary things, that he never used to notice. He seemed, somehow, awake, like a man who had been sleepwalking through his life and had suddenly, inexplicably, opened his eyes. She did not like what that meant, and she had a fairly good idea of who had caused it. So she went to the one person in that house who would understand the threat immediately. Madame Kwan listened to everything over a pot of expensive tea, her face giving away nothing at all. She let Hyuna talk herself empty, the worried observations, the small moments, the growing certainty that an outsider had wormed her way into the heart of the family's only son. When Hyuna finished, there was a long silence. "She's getting to him," Hyuna said. "I can feel it. In all the months I've known him, I have never once made him laugh the way that girl does." Madame Kwan set down her cup with great care. "Chasing her away will solve nothing," she said at last. "If we simply throw her out, my son will go looking for her. He'll romanticize her. She'll become the great lost love, the one taken from him. No." She folded her hands. "What we need is for him to turn away from her himself. We need him to see something that cannot be unseen, something that makes him let her go on his own, and never look back." What do you think Madame Kwan and Hyuna could be planning? Hyuna's heart quickened. "Then tell me what to do." And in that quiet, beautiful room, with its expensive tea and its perfect silence, the trap began to take shape, patiently, elegantly, the way only careful people know how to build the things that are meant to destroy. There was a deal at stake, you see, a business contract, one Madame Kwan and her husband had been working toward for years, and it depended entirely on the marriage between Junho and Hyuna. Two great families joined into one great fortune. Everything Madame Kwan had ever schemed and sacrificed for hung on that union. And she would not lose it, not over a maid, not over anyone. There was one evening, before everything broke, that Zara would carry with her for the rest of her life. It was late, the household had gone to sleep. She was sitting on the back steps of the estate, looking up at a sky too bright with city light to show many stars, when Junho came out and sat down beside her. He'd brought her a cup of tea without being asked. She hadn't expected that. Maybe that was why, that night, she finally let herself talk. She wrapped both hands around the warm cup and stared out into the dark for a moment. And then, quietly, she told him the truth she had been carrying alone. "My mother's name is Gloria Coleman," she began, "and I want you to understand something before I say anything else. Gloria Coleman is not a woman who complains. In 48 years of living, she has never once asked the world for an easy day." She told him how her mother had raised her alone in Atlanta after her father left, when Zara was 7 years old. How Gloria had worked double shifts at a laundromat, year after year, making sure her daughter always had lunch money and clean clothes, and someone waiting at the school gate. How her mother used to tell her, over and over, "Baby, the only thing in this life that nobody can ever take from you is what you put in your mind. So put good things in there." "I believed her," Zara said softly. "I believed every word she ever told me." She told him how she'd gotten into nursing school on a full scholarship, the first person in her entire family to go to university, how her mother had cried for 20 whole minutes when the acceptance letter came, and then told Zara to stop staring at her and go do her homework. Junho didn't interrupt, didn't fill the silences. He just listened, the way she had once asked if he was hurt. Like the most important thing in the world was simply to pay attention. "I was 2 semesters from finishing," she went on, and her voice changed, the way a road changes when the smooth part ends. "I'd done my hospital placement. I was good at it too, and I know everyone says that, but the patients asked for me by name. There was this old man, Mr. Patterson, 81 years old, always trying to sneak extra sugar into his coffee, and I'd catch him every single time, and he'd laugh like a little boy caught stealing cookies." She smiled at the memory, and then the smile faded. "I loved that job. I loved what it meant. I was going to be the first nurse in my family. She paused, took a slow sip of tea. And then my mother got the diagnosis. She told him about the small room with the box of tissues already sitting on the table before they'd even sat down. And how you always know it's serious when they put the tissues out before the conversation starts. Stage 3 breast cancer. The doctor had been kind. He'd explained everything carefully. The treatment options, the timelines, what each stage of the long road ahead would look like. What he couldn't explain, she said, was the money. She told him how their insurance had covered some of it, but not nearly enough. How the gap between what was covered and what the treatment actually cost was like standing on one side of a canyon and being told to jump across. She told him how she'd tried everything, every grant, every assistance program, every charity fund she could find, extra shifts at a diner on weekends. She'd sold her furniture, sold her laptop, sold a camera she'd been saving up for since she was 17 years old. And then, while she was already drowning, the scholarship office had called. Budget cuts. Her funding was being discontinued at the end of the semester. The woman on the phone had sounded genuinely sorry. But sorry doesn't pay for chemotherapy, Zara said. So she'd made a choice. Stay in school and sink deeper into debt with no income, or leave and find work that actually paid enough to keep her mother alive. I left school, she said. I told myself it was temporary. I still tell myself that. She told him about her friend in Seoul, the one who'd called her one night while Zara sat in the hospital parking lot, who'd said there was a nursing position opening up at an international clinic, English-speaking staff wanted, pay almost 3 times what she'd make back home. 3 times, Junho. I didn't even go home to think about it. I went home to pack. She told him how her mother had cried, not because she wanted Zara to stay, but because she felt guilty, because her sickness was the reason her daughter was leaving everything behind, and how Zara had sat on the edge of that hospital bed and held her mother's hand and said, "Mama, this is not something happening to me. This is something I am choosing. There's a difference." She made me promise to call her every night, Zara said, and I have. Every single night since I landed. Then her voice dropped, and she told him the last part, the part she hadn't told anyone. The nursing job fell through 2 days after I arrived. Paperwork problem, her American credentials needing verification that would take months. The clinic was sorry. Everyone was always so sorry. But sorry didn't pay rent in Seoul any more than it paid for chemo in Atlanta. She'd had enough savings for maybe 3 weeks. She'd needed income immediately. And so she'd found the agency listing that same night. A live-in domestic position, a wealthy estate in Gangnam, room and meals included, immediate start. I sat in a little internet cafe and stared at that listing for a long time, she said. I thought about what my mother would say. I thought about Mr. Patterson and his sugar. I thought about that acceptance letter I'd read 4 times because I couldn't believe something that good was real. She let out a slow breath. And then I thought about my mother in that bed. And I applied. She finally turned and looked at him. You asked me once why I always looked like I was carrying something heavy. Now you know. My mother has 6 months of treatment left. The last report the doctors gave us said cautiously optimistic. I've read those 2 words so many times they've stopped looking like real words. I just need to get her to the end. I just need to make sure she gets there. And every single thing I do in this house, every morning I wake up before the sun, every yes ma'am, it's all for her. It has always been for her. If you are enjoying this story, click on the subscribe button and leave a comment. The night was very quiet around them. Junho hadn't moved the entire time. He sat with everything she'd given him the way you hold something fragile and precious. And after a long moment, he didn't offer comfort, didn't offer pity. He simply said a true thing. Your mother raised someone extraordinary. I hope she knows that. Zara didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, I tell her every night. And that was the night Junho understood that what he felt for this woman was not something that would pass. It wasn't convenience or curiosity or the novelty of someone different from everyone he'd ever known. It was the feeling of finally standing in the presence of something real and realizing, with a quiet kind of devastation, how long he had been living without it. Did anything happen that night? What do you think happened that night? Let me know on the comment. It started with a glass of water. Such a small, ordinary thing. Zara had poured herself a glass in the kitchen and set it down on the counter. Just for a moment, just while she stepped away to finish another task. She came back. She drank it. She didn't think twice. And then the evening began to feel strange. The air grew thick. Her thoughts slowed down like they were moving through water. The room tilted gently at the edges. She sat down just to steady herself, pressing a hand to her forehead, trying to understand what was happening to her body. Her head felt impossibly heavy. The world began to blur and soften and slip out of her grasp like sand running through open fingers. And then there was nothing. A darkness she fell into without choosing to. When she woke, she was somewhere in the house she had never been, a room that wasn't hers. She sat up slowly, disoriented, her mind foggy and frightened, trying to piece together how she had gotten there. And before she could understand anything at all, the door opened. They were already there. Madame Kwan, Hyuna, composed and quiet, her phone already in her hand. Members of the household staff gathering in the doorway, and then Junho pushing through to the front. Zara looked at him. He looked at her. And the thing that broke her heart in that moment wasn't the accusation that was coming. It wasn't the cold voices or the gathering crowd, or even the shame of being found where she had no memory of going. It was the look on Junho's face. The look that asked a question and answered it in the very same instant. The look of a man who believed the story he was being shown before she could ever tell him hers. What were you doing in this room? Madame Kwan's voice cut through the air, sharp and triumphant beneath its mask of horror. I don't know, Zara said, and even to her own ears it sounded impossible. I swear I don't know how I got here. I was in the kitchen, I had a glass of water, and then everything, I don't remember. Do you really expect us to believe that? Madame Kwan's voice rose. Zara turned to Junho, to the man who, just nights before, had sat beside her under the city sky, and told her she was extraordinary. Please, she said to him, something isn't right. I don't know how I got here. You know me. You know me. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in his face. Doubt, maybe. The memory of a girl who'd asked if he was hurt. The memory of tea in the kitchen and books in the library and gospel songs in cold hallways. But the scene around him was too complete, too overwhelming. His mother's outrage, the gathered staff, his fiancé's quiet devastation, the sheer impossible weight of what he thought he was seeing. And he was, in the end, a man who had spent his whole life believing what he was told to believe. I'm disappointed, he said. Do well to subscribe and tune on your notification bell icon. 3 words. She felt every single one of them land like a stone. She didn't cry, she didn't beg. She would not give them that. She stood up straight, gathered the last of her dignity around her like a coat, and looked Madame Kwan directly in the eye. Madame Kwan, who would not quite look back. If you don't believe me, Zara said quietly, then there's nothing more I can say. And she walked out of that estate with nothing but what she had carried into it.
And never
which,
come back.
though they did not know it, had always been so much more than they thought. Stay tuned for part 2. You are about to learn the mystery behind all the